When people think of the Burnout franchise, they usually remember console releases like Burnout 3 Takedown, Burnout Revenge, or Burnout Paradise. But what often gets overlooked is that Burnout had a real presence on the handheld market. The PSP got not one, but two different Burnout titles, Burnout Legends in 2005 and Burnout Dominator in 2007. Both games squeezed the franchise's signature chaos onto Sony's little handheld in their own individual ways, and that's what we're going to look at today. So without further ado, let's get into the weird Burnout PSP games. So let's just cover a brief history of the console. So the PlayStation Portable launched in most countries in 2005, and the aim was to deliver console quality gaming on the go. And just like on home consoles, racing games were some of the strongest titles early on. You had titles like Ridge Racer, Wipeout Pure, and Need for Speed, and they all proved the PSP could handle this kind of high-speed action. So naturally, Burnout seemed like a good fit for the console. The big question was, could a handheld capture the speed, the takedowns, and the insane crashes that made Burnout so addictive in the first place? Well, the answer came in September of 2005 with Burnout Legends. So the PlayStation Portable version of Burnout Legends was brought to you by Criterion Games, who were the main developers for the Burnout franchise on home console. The aim of Burnout Legends was essentially to take aspects of the first three games, so Burnout, Burnout 2 Point of Impact, and 3 Takedown, and merge them all into one definitive experience to play on the go. It takes tracks and cars across the first three games and displays them in the style of Burnout 3 Takedown. So to me, this feels like another version of that game, which is perfect because Burnout 3 Takedown is my favourite racing game, well, favourite video game of all time. So much like Takedown, the primary game mode in Burnout Legends is called World Tour, which is broken up and divided into different car types, and then further divided into different event types. So the event types are as follows: you have a race, which is pretty self-explanatory, Eliminator, which is a race but each lap the lowest ranking car is eliminated, there's Face-Off, where you go against one car and you'll win it at the end. Then there are Burning Laps, which is basically Burnout's version of time trials, and usually the Burning Laps will let you use a car that you can't typically use until much later on in the game, such as the US Circuit Racer. Then of course we have Crash, where you have to just cause as much monetary damage as you possibly can, Pursuit, where you become the cop to take out one or more racers before the time runs out, and then of course we have the absolute classic, Road Rage. Every single one of these game modes is just as fun as it is in the home console versions of Burnout. The physics are still super light and fun, the handling is still super light and fun, as well as arcadey, and overall it's just a really cool Burnout experience on handheld. Burnout Legends also has more cars to unlock than Burnout 3, with a total of 89 cars that you can unlock through the different classes, versus just under 70 in Burnout 3. The only downside to these additional cars is that Legends introduces something called Collector's Cars. There are 5 Collector's Cars for each class, and you will be given just one at random for each class, and to get the other 4, you have to win them battling against other players online. Which sounds like it would have been cool back in 2005, but sadly the PSP's online functionality has long since been shut down, meaning you can't obtain all of these collector's cars. Which means sadly you'll never actually be able to 100% complete Burnout Legends, which I think is incredibly frustrating because it is a really good game. Much like other Burnout entries, Legends also features a very good licensed soundtrack. Takedown will always be my favourite of these soundtracks because I'm the most nostalgic for it, but Legends is still a pretty good score nonetheless. Visually, the game is still a charm to look at today. No, it doesn't look as good as its home console counterparts, but it never could. So what we got, bearing in mind it released in the early days of the PSP, I think is very impressive. Now, in terms of the game's critical response, Burnout Legends on the PSP holds an 86 out of 100 on Metacritic, as well as an 8.6 out of 10 user score. Now, it's important to note that Legends was ported to the Nintendo DS later on in 2005 by a company called Visual Impact, and this version of the game was absolutely horrible, currently sitting at an abysmal 38 out of 100 on Metacritic. I have actually covered Legends DS on the channel, so if you want to go and see that review, check that out after this video. Anyway, as well as getting some pretty good review scores, Burnout Legends also sold pretty decently, with just under 900,000 copies shifted, and this is from VG Charts. Anyway, if you've not played this version of Burnout Legends before, I would highly recommend it. To me, it feels like a nice companion piece or an extension of Burnout 3 Takedown, so it was pretty nostalgic going into it even if I hadn't played the game before. But anyway, now we know the PSP can handle a game like Burnout, let's see what comes next. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of classic racing game series or PSP games, then why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with all my future uploads. And whilst you're at it, if you want to be the first to hear about every upcoming project on the channel, or just come and chat about some cool games, join my Discord server using the link in the description below. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So in early 2007, the world was introduced to Burnout Dominator. This game released both on the PS2 and the PSP, and they're pretty much identical to each other. Now, interestingly enough, Burnout Dominator would lead you to believe it was developed again by Criterion Games, but that is not the case, as this was actually developed by the team over at EA UK, also known as EA Brightlight, who brought you all the Harry Potter tie-in games. When you boot the game up, the Criterion logo still comes up, and in the game manual they are listed as the makers of the game. Which I think is just really strange, because if it's not made by Criterion, don't advertise it as made by Criterion. And that would make Burnout Dominator the only Burnout game in the franchise that was not developed by Criterion, outside of the DS port of Burnout Legends. Anyway, Burnout Dominator moved away from the series Crash Mode and went in a bit more of a linear direction. The main focus of Dominator is the return of the actual burnouts, which you can achieve when you burn through your boost meter without stopping. Then you can chain these burnouts by driving dangerously while using the boost, such as drifting around corners, driving into oncoming traffic, and getting near misses. In fact, there's an entire game mode around this mechanic where you have to try and chain as many boosts as you can and score the highest possible score. Anyway, so once again, the main single player mode in Dominator is known as World Tour. However, it is a lot more linear this time compared to previous entries. In prior entries in the series, you could pick and choose events in different regions, at least to a certain extent, but this time around they are divided into classes and are all displayed to you just in order instead of across a world map. Now, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I personally just think it takes away from the charm of the series. Anyway, so Dominator has the following events: the standard race, you have Road Rage, Eliminator, Burning Lap, then we have a mode called Maniac Mode, which involves you driving as dangerously as you can to earn scores, so again, drifting, oncoming traffic, and near misses. Then there are Grand Prix, which are just 3 races in a row, a Drift Challenge, where you get scored by drifting, a Near Miss Challenge, which is self-explanatory, and the Burnout Challenge, which is what I mentioned earlier, where you have to chain your burnouts. And overall, I'd say that's a good lineup of game modes. Now, as this was not developed by Criterion, the handling in this game does feel a lot lighter and floatier than it did in previous games, and it does take a little bit of getting used to if you spent a lot of time with previous entries in the series. One thing I do like about Dominator is that there are some specific criteria you need to unlock cars in events. So you'll have a race, and yes, you need to get the gold medal to win the race, but it will also tell you you need to get 15 near misses to unlock a certain car at the end of the race. I think that's kind of cool, and adds a new layer into certain events that they desperately needed. And speaking of unlocking cars, there are significantly less cars to unlock and drive in Dominator compared to previous entries, because you only have just over 30 cars to unlock, which isn't a problem, and there are some good cars here, but just a bit disappointing that there are significantly less cars to unlock than in the previous PSP entry as well as previous console entries. Visually, Dominator still looks good today. I think it holds up. I just think that Legends looks nicer. Legends did a better job of capturing what it was to be a Burnout game, whereas I find Dominator has a bit of a weird washed look to it. Anyway, in terms of critical response, Burnout Dominator would go on to still receive some pretty decent review scores, with 76 out of 100 for its Metacritic score, and 7.7 out of 10 for its user score. So not quite as high as some other entries in the series, but still pretty good nonetheless. Dominator also didn't sell nearly as well as Legends did, with just under 500,000 copies sold instead. Still a good number, just not quite as high as Legends reached. Overall, I think Burnout Dominator is still a good game, and I'd love to do a proper full review video on it at some point. I just don't think it's anywhere near as good as some other entries in the series. So to conclude, what's really weird about the Burnout PSP games is that unlike other racing game series that transition to handheld consoles such as the PSP, the games are actually both good. There are certain entries in other franchises such as Need for Speed for the PSP that were definitely not as consistent in terms of their quality. And I think it's weird in the best possible way that both Burnout games on the console actually turned out to be a success. And so that takes us to the end of our look at Burnout for the PSP. Let me know in the comments below, did you own either of these games? Do you like them? Do you not like them? Tell me all about it. And if there's any games you want to see covered on the channel, good or bad, let me know as well. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications of my future uploads. And I just want to give a big shout out to my patrons for the support. I will see you all in my next video, bye bye.